Hi everyone, my name is Robin Caroff. I work for a non-profit organization called Resonantes. We try to prevent gender-based violences, and we do it with several live actions. We do exhibitions, workshops, concerts, and we also create digital tools such as the mobile application Appel. And I will be delighted to talk about all of this with you, but for now I'm going to talk about Dagger Hilt. And context, so in late 2019, Google, during the Android Dev Summit, did a talk about dependency injection where they announced several things. First, that's the first time they actually recommended to Android developers to use dependency injection. In the meantime, they announced that they will discontinue the library Dagger-Android, which was the aim of this library was to ease the use of Dagger for Android development. And in the meantime, they officially recommended a dependency injection framework, and this framework is nothing else than pure Dagger. And 5 months after that, Google open sourced a framework that they've been using internally for quite some time, and they named it Hilt. And in June 2020, we had the first alpha version of Dagger Hilt. And a year later, in 2021, in May, we had the first stable version of Dagger Hilt. I tell you all of this because it gives you a sense of the maturity of the project. And well, dependency injection, I guess if you're in this room, you have a good idea of what dependency injection is, but just to be sure we're all on the same page, basically it's a set of techniques that will help you to decouple your code a lot, to make your code more reusable, more maintainable, and the main idea is that classes should not be responsible for instantiating their dependencies. Dependencies should be provided to the classes, if possible, in the constructor. And of course, to do all of this, you don't necessarily need a dependency injection framework. You can do it manually, but it will require some knowledge about dependency injection. It will also require you to write a lot of boilerplate code. So that's partially why Google recommends you to use a dependency injection framework. And there are many dependency injection frameworks, and I'm not the best guy to do a benchmark of all of those frameworks. Well, what I can tell you though is for all the last project I've been working on, I used Dagger, and so some of the reason why I did this is that the main one is Dagger checks the dependency graph at build time. So that's, to me, it's a huge security, and as far as I know, it's got one of the best runtime performances. So what's Dagger? Dagger is a dependency injection framework. It's made for Java. It means it works for Java applications. It works for Kotlin applications on the JVM, and of course for Android applications. But you need some specific setup for Android. Why that? Because on Android, you don't own all the constructor of all the classes. For instance, you've got some components like activities, application. You don't instantiate those classes yourself. The framework does it for you. So you don't get to customize the constructor and to inject your dependencies in this constructor. And with Dagger, the way you do it is you create some custom components where you link to a module where you define your factories, your bindings, and that's the way it works. But the thing with Dagger is that it is a powerful tool. It's got many conventions, many templates, and it's quite confusing. I mean, from one Medium blog post to a Stack Overflow post to this old project you worked on a couple of years ago, you probably will find a different setup, and it's quite confusing. So there's quite a high learning curve for this tool. So that's why it's a misunderstood tool. And add to this that the documentation was known to be pretty bad. And well, you've got Dagger's reputation. And here's from Dagger Hilt. And with Dagger Hilt, the goal is to simplify the use of Dagger for Android development. And the way they do it is they define some standard components that you will use. And by the way, this is a screenshot from the documentation of Dagger Hilt, and they really did a good job with this documentation. I mean, It's really a clear and understandable documentation. I think they really did a good job, and they also improved the Dagger's documentation as well. So, as I said, the way it works, they define standard Dagger components, so you don't get to write your own Dagger components anymore, and you have to stick with those ones with this strict hierarchy. And so, for instance, you've got the Singleton component, which is probably, if you used Dagger before, you probably created your application component or your app component, so that's basically what it is. And all those components, they come with a default scope, so you can see we've got the Singleton component, you've got the activity component, view component, and so on, and they come with a default scope. They also come with different bindings. So if you attach a module to a component, you will get these bindings. For instance, in the Singleton component, you will get the application binding. In the activity component, you will get the activity binding plus the application binding, and so on. But how does it work concretely? The way you set up Dagger Hilt is actually quite simple. You annotate your application class with @Hilt-Android app, and that's it. That's enough for Hilt to generate the code needed to instantiate the Singleton component, and for you to have your dependencies annotated with @inject to be injected inside your code. Of course, these dependencies need to have a factory or binding defined in a module, but we'll come to that. For other Android components, like your activities, fragments, services, it works pretty much the same way. So you've got an annotation @Android entry point. You annotate your activity with this, and then that's it. You don't need to write the instantiation of the custom Dagger component anymore, and you can inject your dependencies. So pretty fast, pretty simple, and removes a lot of boilerplate code. So that is exactly the same thing for services. So that's why I will speed it up a bit. And now, how does it work for module? If with regular Dagger, pure Dagger, when you create your custom Dagger component, you have to attach them to modules. Okay, you have to reference the modules you want to use with these components. The way it works with Dagger Hilt, because you don't get access to these default components, you create your Dagger module, and in Dagger module, you use this annotation @install-in, and you specify the Hilt component you want this module to be installed in. And you will get, as you can see, for instance, if I want to have this foo module available in the activity component, I had the annotation install it in activity component, and I get the activity binding if I need it for my factories, and I can even use the provided activity scope if I want to scope this dependency with the activity scope. And if you used Dagger before, all the Dagger annotations like qualifiers, multi-binding, and so on still works with Dagger Hilt, so you can really use this with Dagger Hilt. Dagger Hilt also offers functionalities for Jetpack components. So for instance, for the view model, you don't need to write your own view model factory anymore. You can annotate your view model with a @Hilt view model, and then you can provide your dependencies in the constructor if you annotated it with a @inject constructor. And if you use Kotlin extensions, you can instantiate view models with this by view model, and you get for free the save state handle, which is the way you will persist data in view models. You also have a way to perform dependency injections in workers. It requires a bit more configuration, but that's pretty much all it needs. So you need to add some, in the application class, you need to add a worker factory, the dependency to the worker factory, add this method, get work manager configuration, and that's it. Then you can annotate your workers with the annotation @Hilt worker. And you can create an assisted inject constructor where you annotate your context and parameters with assisted, and then you can provide all the dependencies you will need in your worker. I think this is a very convenient way to perform dependency injection in workers. So now I'm going to share with you the retrospective of my approach to Dagger Hilt. It started in January. I mean, I've been using Dagger for quite some time, and I always felt that, okay, I like the tool, but I don't fully understand the tool. So I started to read about it because I really wanted to improve my approach of it. And of course, I read stuff about Dagger Hilt because that was quite new and trendy. Well, trendy. Dependency injection is never a really trendy subject, but here you are. And I thought, well, the best way to find out if it's suitable for me is to try it. And luckily enough, I had a small project I had to do, and I thought, okay, well, why not setting up Hilt from scratch in this project? And I actually was amazed with how fast the setup was. I mean, it's really straightforward, as I showed you. You just annotate your application class with this Hilt-Android app, and your component with @Android entry point, and that's it, you're ready to go. You can define your factories and modules, and it just works. So it really removes boilerplate code, and to me that was great. So now I have to think, okay, should I refactor my main application to add a Dagger Hilt? And this is, well, this is always the big reflection, because refactoring takes time, okay? So and definitely I will not have a performance improvement. So why was I tempted to do this? Is because I had quite a complex setup for my application. I mean, I see all the main application, I see all the screens as different features, okay? So those different features are defined in different Gradle components. And when you do this, you have to create custom Dagger components for all those Gradle components. So that makes a lot of boilerplate code, and it makes the setup quite complex. And as I said, I'm working for a non-profit organization. We're quite a small team. Actually, I am the team. But I had to think, okay, but now we're growing up, and I want to hire other developers, and I would like the onboarding to be quite smooth, and I don't want a complex Dagger setup, so I will really ease this onboarding process. And what I like with Dagger Hilt is it really defines those simple standards, and I think that would be a really good idea to refactor the app for this purpose. And also I will get those integration for Jetpack, which really removes, again, a lot of boilerplate code. Quick note, vanilla Dagger and Dagger-Android are compatible with Hilt. Okay, you can still use them with Hilt. There's a migration guide on the documentation. It's really good, and it covers pretty much all the issues I had during the migration process. And there's also a migration API. I did not use it, but it helps you if you want to migrate step by step. I mean, if you don't want to migrate your entire application at once, you can use this API to ease the process. So the way I did it, the first thing was to migrate the application component. And as I showed you, it's quite easy. I had to annotate my application with @Hilt-Android app, and then I could remove my custom app component. And I just had to, in all modules related to my app component, I had to add the annotation install in Singleton Component. And that was it. All my dependencies in the application class were injected with no problem. Now, the most important part was to map all my custom Dagger components with Hilt standard components. So I had to well, there was a bit of a thinking here, and to refactor, to place all my dependencies in the right module. That's the tricky part. But after that, I could remove all my custom components just to use Hilt one. And install my new modules in the related component, and I could even put pretty much all my factories and bindings in the same modules related to those default components, right? I had to update my scopes because I have to use the scope provided by Hilt. And by the way, in the migration API, you've got a way to rename a scope for Hilt if you want. If you want to still use something like your app scope, you can do it and just say it's equivalent to a Singleton. Then build, run, test, and deal with the issues. And as I said, one of the great thing with Dagger is that it checks the dependencies graph at build time. So if there's an issue, you'll probably find this out during build time. And some of the difficulties that I encountered is that there's a rule with Hilt that Hilt fragment must be attached to Hilt activities. And in my app, I had some activities that were not injected at all. They were just containers for fragments. And the fragments were injected. So I annotated those fragments with at Android entry point. But at runtime, it crashed because the activity was not a Hilt activity. The easy solution was to annotate all my activities with at Android entry point. And I think it's an easy and safe solution. Also, the default bindings that are provided to your components modules are application and activity. Okay, this is not app compat activity. This is not your base activity. So if you want to provide this, you will have to cast this. But if you use your base activity everywhere in your application, there should not be a problem. I also had to standardize the binding naming just because I use stuff like, I don't know, activity login, so I had to remove this, to rename this, and I had to do it for pretty much every custom component I created before. Not a big deal, but it takes time. And finally, the view model components parent is retained activity component, which means that at this point, you don't get access to the activity. So this is not the activity component. And the reason to that is because you should not provide the activity context to a view model, because a view model can survive configuration changes, and if you provided it with the activity context, it will leak the activity context. So you don't want to do this. But I'm using an MVVM model, architecture module, where some of my use cases add dependencies that depend on an activity context. So I had to do a bit of refactoring and to rethink where I will, in which component I will install my use case modules. But it's actually a healthy refactoring, so I'm quite happy that I had to do it. Right, this is my final slide. This is the takeaway slide. The pros, I think that Dagger Hilt defines Android templates and default standards for using Dagger on Android. So it definitely, you spend less time thinking about your setup, the setup you're going to use for your application, because it's actually provided to you and you have to stick with it. Definitely remove boilerplate code. I mean, a lot less boilerplate code. So less space for mistakes compared to Dagger. It's got a really decent documentation. I mean, that's a plus, definitely. And view models and workers injections are simplified. Again, no custom factory for my view models, so that was a huge improvement. And it's and to me the key thing with Dagger Hilt, and I think it is a lot the onboarding for new employees to the code base. The cons, it's less customizable, but hey, that's the point, isn't it? And the code is less decoupled. I say that in a way that all your dependencies available for with the activity scope will be available for all activities, all right? Because they will all be related, installed in the activity components. That's an example. But then your code is less decoupled. The impact with this is you won't be able to take usage of a parallel compilation for the different Dagger components, but you will be able to use more the desugaring features of Dagger. The fragment UI test don't work out of the box, and the reason to that is what I told you before about the fragment not being attached to a Hilt activity. So you will have a bit of code to do to make it work, but not out of the box. It's not suitable for dynamic features, which may be a showstopper for you. To me, with my previous architecture model, with all those different Gradle modules, I I thought it will enable me to use dynamite feature, but actually I never used it. So that was not that didn't stop me to use Dagger Hilt. There's a risk of additional build time overhead. Frankly, I don't have a huge application, so I did not notice a huge impact of either on my laptop or on the CI. And as every new library, there's always a risk of being shut down. You never know. All right, that's it for me. I think I've got time to take some questions. And if you've got some feedback, I would love to hear from you. You can do it directly inside the application, or you can just scan the QR code. Thank you.
Before the migration, did you have any vanilla components with a state in it? And if so, how did you migrate this to Hilt components that can't have any state in it?
What do you mean by? Okay. The question is, before the migration, did you have any state in your custom Dagger component, and then how did you migrate to those Hilt components where you can't have a state in it? That's part of the refactoring. You have to rethink where to place your modules. So maybe you have to give them a higher scope, which in some case it won't be the right solution for you. I don't know, if you do something really specific, maybe stick with pure Dagger, or have a look at other libraries, like Anvil. Probably you heard about it. That's also something you can add on top of Dagger. Wow, that was clear. Okay, thank you very much.